Welcome back to our discussion on user authentication. So what I want to do in this video is to implement the login functionality as well as the logout functionality. Okay, so I went ahead and I created a login form. Okay, and let's look at that. So we have email and we have password. Notice we're not concerning ourselves with keeping track of the password in terms of if something was entered wrong, we display the password. If you recall, that's not something we do. No. Likewise, we're going to do the same for email. So for email, we will not be highlighting the input area with red. Okay. All we will do though is to put back the email. All right. So we're going to put back the email. Okay, what we will do, however, is if there is an error, we will display the error on top of the form. So it will not have any red on the input boxes, but we will have a sign that tells us that there is an error on the form. Okay, so this is the login form, and of course it goes to user login, okay, on post. And of course, we're using non-validate because we will be doing our own validation. Let's go to the routes file. And so I added the login, notice, get and post. For the get, we're going to use login user form. For the post, we're going to use login user. And for logout, since logout is something that it changes some state, okay? So because it changes state, it's going to be post. And so for the logout functionality, we will have the logout user method. Okay, and that's it for the routes file. So we have completed all our RESTful routes. Okay, so sign up, login, logout. So these are the last three that we will be working on. Again, for post, anything that changes state needs to be a post. Okay. So we will look at our login. So let me go to handlers, and this is my login user form. Again, I went ahead and I wrote the code because by now you know what this code does. And so we're going to parse files and we're going to give it the login page.tmpl. If there are any errors, we have a server error. If not, we're going to execute. We're not going to pass in any data because it's a GET request. We're displaying the form. And of course, if there are any errors, we also do a serve error. So very straightforward. Okay. So what I want to focus on is actually the login user and the logout user. So let's do the login user first. Okay. So for me to log in the user, I need to be able to authenticate the user. So in other words, I need a way to check to see if the email and the password that the user entered is actually valid. Okay, so to do that, I will create an authenticate function that will be a method on our user's model. Okay, so for a user model, we have insert. So we call insert to insert a user. We want to call authenticate to authenticate a user. So what does authentication involve? Well, it involves getting the getting the email from the handler, getting the password from the handler, using that email and password to do a query to the database table, and to get that information. And if the information is valid, then we want to compare the passwords. And if the passwords are the same, then we know it's a valid user. So step one, we need to check to see if the email is a valid email. Okay, let's do that. So I'm going to quickly create a couple of variables. ID, since we're going to return ID and an error message. Okay. The ID is the ID in the database, okay, which starts at 1, if you recall. We're going to create another variable called hashed password, and of course it's going to be of type byte. Okay, so that's straightforward. So now let's craft our SQL statement. Okay, and our SQL statement is simply a select. So I'm going to say select ID hashed password. Let me make sure I have that correct. Password hash. Okay, it's password hash. Okay, so activated by default is true. Okay, so it's password underscore hash. Okay, password underscore hash. Okay, from users, and we're gonna say where email is the email that is provided, and the activated column or value is true. Okay, so the email is true, email is correct, and the user is actually a valid active user. All right, so that's very straightforward. Okay, so very straightforward. And so let's run our query. So I'm going to say error is m.db, database connection, that query row, and we're going to pass in our SQL statement, and we're going to pass in the email. Okay, good. So we have our email, okay, and we have our password hash. And so we pass in the SQL statement, we pass in the email, which will replace the $1, and then whatever is returned, we're going to save that in our ID variable and in our hashed, oops, in our hashed password variable. Okay, obviously we need to check for errors. So if error, again, this is code we've seen before. By now you should understand how to handle errors. All right, so if error not equals to nil, what I want to do is to check to see if it's a error that tells me that no row was returned. So if no row was returned, it simply means that the email is wrong. Okay, so if errors that is error, and the message for no errors is SQL dot error no records. Okay, so if that's the case, then we know that the user's email is wrong, and so we will simply return 0, since 0 tells us that there is no row, and then we're going to return the models that invalid credentials. Okay, now if a row has been returned but there is some other kind of error, okay, so we're going to say else. Okay, we're just going to return 0, okay, and we're going to return the error, whatever it is. Okay, so we're not really checking for other errors, we'll just return those, but we do care if it's a bad email. Okay, we do care about that. Okay, so that's our else, and that's here. And this is the end of the method. All right, so let's continue. Okay, so assuming we get here, it means that there was no error, and so the email the user entered was correct. Okay, so now we need to check the passwords. Check the password. So again, if there are no errors, it means we get back a valid email. We get back a valid user ID and a password that has been hashed. So this means that the email the user provided is correct. So let's now check the email. The password, like I said just now. And the process is rather straightforward. We will call, by the way, it returns an error. We will call bcrypt.compare hash and password. Isn't that nice? There is a function from the bcrypt library package that you provide the hashed password, okay, which we got from the database table, and we give it the password that we got from the login form. Of course, we need to convert that to the type byte slice. And what it will do, it will compare them. And of course, it will return an error message if there is one, if something is wrong. So if error not equals to nil, then we know we have a problem. So I will check if errors that is error bcrypt error mismatch. Right? If that's it, if the error is mismatch hash and password, well, clearly it tells me that the passwords don't match up. And if passwords don't match up, I'm going to simply return 0 along with models that invalid credentials. Okay. Else, again, there is some error which I'm not quite sure what it is, so I'm just going to return 0 and that error message. Okay, so that takes care of that. Now, if I do get past that code, it means that the passwords match. So the email is correct, and so the passwords match. And so if those two things are true, then I will simply return the ID for that user along with nil to signify that everything was perfect. And that's our authenticate function. And so our authenticate function will simply tell us if the user is valid or not. If the user is valid, we return the user's ID from the database and nil. If not, we're going to return 0 and some error. Good, that's straightforward. Okay, again, all this code you've seen, so all you need to be thinking of is my logic. You try to follow my logic because by now you know the code. Okay, so this is how you compare hashed passwords. Again, the database, we store the hashed password. And so we read it back into our code, and then we compare it to the password the user put in the login form. Okay, with that out of the way, we can go to our handler and call Authenticate. Okay, so let's deal with the login user. Okay, so this is our post. Okay, so whenever we log in, this is the function that the method that we will call. And so, of course, as you know by now, you have to parse the form. You have to get the form data, right? So we've done this many times. So I'm just going to grab some code from up here. Okay. All right. So, oops. And by the way, I'm just copying code because again, you have done this. So I'm just trying to save time. Okay. Okay. So we're going to parse. There's a problem, client error. Otherwise, we're going to get the data from the form. And then, of course, we're going to create a map just in case there are any errors. Copy that. Come back down here. Okay. Obviously, it's not author, it's email. And then it's password, so it's 2 fields. Can get rid of that. And I'm going to call this email. And I'm going to call this password. And then I'm going to call this errors underscore user. Okay, that's the name for a map. Okay, so once we have those things, then we will call our authenticate function. So id comma is app dot user dot authenticate. And so of course we'll pass in the email and we'll pass in the password. So come down here, okay, and so we will check to see if there are any errors. So if error not equals to nil, then obviously something went wrong, but I don't know what exactly, so I need to do another if errors that is error models dot dot. If that's the case, we know something is wrong. Either the email is wrong or the password is wrong. But what we're going to do, since we don't want to help the user, so I'm sure you've tried to log into some application and you don't quite remember what your email is, or you're not quite sure if it's your password that's wrong. But the web application never tells you. It tells you password or email is incorrect. And that's intentional. The reason it does that is so that if you are somebody that's trying to break in or using someone else's account and you're trying to forge their identity or steal their identity, then you want to make the job hard. So if I were to tell them that, oh, it's the password that's wrong, then they know that the email is correct. All right. And if I were to tell them the email is wrong, then they know the password is correct. And so they can now figure out what the email is. So you don't want to do that. You want them to be trying to figure out two things. All right. So that's why you would say either the password or the email is wrong. And so they don't know which one. Okay. Of course, if you are the valid user, and this has happened to me many times, I genuinely forget, and so I'm not quite sure which one is wrong. Okay, but I figure it out eventually. And so it's sort of a security feature. And so if that's the case, then you want to display an error message on the form. So I will simply say, oh, I already did that. Errors user. I'm going to create a key called default. So a default message. And that message will be email or password is incorrect. Okay. And then of course, I will have to redisplay the form so that the user can input the data again. Luckily for us, we have done that many times, so I'm just gonna grab the code from here. Okay, re-render form. Okay. Okay. Okay, so here I will re-render the login form. Okay, so this is login. All right, and then of course we're gonna pass in the error and then of course the form data. Okay, so this is the end of my if, let's see, and so this one is here. Okay, so it means I will have to return. Okay. All right. Great. So if I end up here, meaning that everything works out, then that only means one thing. It means that the user entered the correct credentials. And when the user enters the correct credentials, I am going to add the user's ID to this session store, right? This session storage, the cookie, okay, on the client side. So I'm going to say app.session.put. Okay, I'm going to put, of course, authenticated, authenticated user ID. Okay, so that is my key, and then the value is simply the user's ID. All right, so now we have a record of that user, we have the ID. So we can use that ID as a means to check to see if the user has been authenticated. So if we want to check a user, they want to do some action, we'll first check that authenticated user ID to see if it's actually there and if it's valid, right? Now, once I have done that, then the next thing to do is to redirect the user to the create quote page. All right. So in essence, we're saying that once you have been authenticated, you are able to create a quote. Okay. / create. And of course, I'm going to say HTTP that status C other. Okay. All right, great. So that takes care of our login feature. And let's quickly do the logout feature because it's rather straightforward. All we're going to do when we log out the user is to remove the authenticated user ID value from the store, from the session cookie. Okay, and that's rather straightforward. So app.session.remove, and then we simply remove authenticated user ID. Let me just copy that. Okay, so it has been removed. Okay, so removes, deletes the given key and corresponding value from the session data. Okay, great. After we have deleted it, then we will simply display a message, a flash message that tells the user that they have been logged out. So I'm going to say app.session that put. Again, we will use the flash word as our key. And for the value, I'm going to simply say you have been logged out successfully. Successfully. All right, great. So that is how you do that. And after we have done that, then we will simply redirect them to the home page. Okay, because users who are not authenticated should not be able to create a quote. Okay, they should only be able to see a quote or see the quotes. All right, redirect WR. Oh, what am I doing? Okay, WR, and we need the URL. That's home, and of course HTTP that C that status. Sorry, C other. Okay, and that is how we log out. Now, we wrote quite a bit of code, so let's check to see that this works. In the meantime, I forgot to start my browser, but I'm going to start it, and so I'll spend a minute discussing the idea of authentication. Now, authentication is just the first step. Okay, so all this really means is that we're checking to see that the person is who they say they are. And so authentication is the first step. Now the second step, which we'll look at later, is authorization. So if you have an authenticated user, what are they authorized to do? Okay, so it's two steps. We're doing the authentication, making sure they are who they are. Okay, so for example, it could be you're a student, I'm a lecturer. So we have different authentication styles, right? You have to provide your student ID. I have to provide my name, all right? And then depending on that, then they'll say, oh yeah, okay, you're a student, good. And then in my case, they'll say, oh yeah, okay, you work here, good. That's authentication. Now, you will have certain things you can do as a student, and I will have certain things I can do as a worker. Okay, and that's authorization. Okay, which we look at next. HTTP s / localhost. Oh, I didn't start the server, so let's do that. All right, let's refresh. Great. So this is the home page, and so I will now currently notice I can go to create code. I can go to any of these locations, and authentication does not prevent me from doing that. Only authorization does. So we look at authorization next. Okay, so we have sign up. Oh, we already did sign up, but let me sign up. Create a new user. Let's say Ali Jones, maybe. Email a Jones at b.edu.bz bz, and the password is apple juice 2022. Okay, so apple juice 2022. Okay, hope I got that right. Okay, so once the user has been successfully signed up, they are redirected to the login page. And so yes, notice all of these are showing, okay, but later on when we authorize, you'll see that some of these will be hidden. Okay, all right, so A Jones, and the password is apple juice. In fact, let me not do anything yet. Let me just leave that blank. Log in. Okay. So this is what shows up. Email or password is incorrect. So notice, I don't know which one it is. It could be the email, it could be the password. Even though I still put back the password, I still put back the email. Okay. So since I am the true user, I am not somebody who's faking. Okay, then I know that my email is correct. So let me put my password. Apple Juice 2022. All right. Don't save. Uh-oh. Let's see. Apple Juice 2022. Let's try again. No. Whew. All right, I forgot. All right, so let's try again. Jane Lewis, email, J Lewis at, okay, password. Okay, good. Let's try again. J Lewis, sorry, J Lewis. Okay, so okay. All right, good. So I entered the password correct. And when I do that, I'm redirected to the create quote page. Okay. So obviously, if you notice, I shouldn't see the sign up button because I've already signed up. I shouldn't really see login because I've already logged in, right? Okay. So it works. This is how we authenticate a user. Of course, if we log out, we should end up back at the home page. Okay. So that is authentication. Now, in the next lesson, or series of lessons or videos, I want us to use this idea of authentication and then apply it to something useful, which is authorization. Depending on you're being authenticated, you can do certain things on the website, on the web application. All right, so I hope that made sense. I'll see you in the next lesson.